Welcome agents. With the Tidal Basin update yesterday comes some very lengthy patch notes along with two new exotic weapons, the secret to the last hunter spawn and the 8th ivory key. Now I thought today I'd go over everything in this one video, and I will leave timestamps in the description so you can pick what you want to look at. If you enjoy this video, please do not hesitate to hit the like button below and subscribe for dedicated Division content. With that said, let's get to it. Okay, so first up, we're going to go over the patch notes. Now, instead of going through everything, which would probably take upwards of 20 minutes, I've instead picked what I believe to be the most important changes or additions to come with the update. Now, if you do want to read the full patch notes, I'll leave a link down below, but you better make sure you've got yourself enough time. Okay, so let's get into this. First up, we got damage on the MK17 rifle, reduced by 14%. Also corrected this weapon not having a damage fall off over distance. Now, I didn't actually know that. I knew they were going to nerf the MK17, but I didn't realise there was no damage fall off. The lightweight M4 damage is increased by 5%. The RPM is increased from 240 to 360. The Lover C RPM increased from 240 to 380, so slightly more RPM than the lightweight M4, but no increase on the base damage. The Model 700 damage is reduced by 13%. Now, I don't know about you guys, but to be honest, it's still the strongest. From what I can tell, it's still the strongest sniper. It's still got the highest base damage. I was expecting for it to be in line with something like the M44 or something like that, but it's still the strongest. AA-12 damage has been increased by 16%. That's the shotgun from Division 1. You call it the showstopper, but it's the fast-firing shotgun, so that damage has been increased significantly. The MG5 damage is increased by 12%. And they fix reversed fall-off, causing the weapon to do more damage over a longer range. So the MG5 is a pretty fast-firing LMG, and I have to say, I think the base damage was pretty low, so I'm glad they've increased it, although even still right now, I still don't know if it's as strong as like the M60 and stuff, but I've not actually tested it yet. Moving on, updated initial accuracy on the signature sniper Macmillan T1. It should now be much more reliable to shoot as soon as it's shouldered, and the transition to scoped view is over. Again, another really important change to the signature sniper. I've not tested this. You guys have to let me know whether it's actually a lot better now. Reduce the amount of critical damage and headshot damage that can roll on gear, including the amount on existing gear. The actual values will differ depending on the level and quality of the gear it occurs on. This is partially in preparation for another World Tier, where we felt these values were already at the limit of what was healthy in World Tier 4. So, I think what they're basically doing is, you'd have crit damage that was like 23% plus, headshot damage that was like 18% plus, and that would have been the maximum in World Tier 5, but we're only in World Tier 4, so they kind of scaled it back, and then you're going to get that sort of stuff on the World Tier 5 sort of 500 gear score items. We got complete overhaul of skill mods to give more achievable requirements and more reasonable bonuses. And if you've been into the update, you'll notice the change to skills. It's actually a really good one, from what I can tell. A closer equivalence between required skill power and the bonuses granted. Change the amount of skill power on gear to not increase exponentially with level, but instead more linearly. I can't say that word properly. This results in most skill power values on gear being lower, but in accordance with the lowered requirements. Tweak the ranges of bonuses to be within acceptable bounds, where they had extreme values before due to scaling errors, most notably radius and ammo charges values. So you've probably seen a lot of builds prior to this change where radius and ammo charges would be crazy. I think Jasamian actually did a build which was crazy strong with skill power, and I think that's partly why it kind of got nerfed. I think the devs saw that and thought maybe it was just too much. Players will see both the bonuses and the requirements of almost all skill mods change as a result of this overhaul. So you've probably already seen that yourselves. In endgame, both superior and high-end skill mods exist to cover the different needs of different builds. They can overlap in power, but high-end mods have a higher maximum roll potential. That's a really cool one, actually, because what you'll find is that if you've got really low skill power, then you're going to want to run superior mods because they have a lot lower requirements, but they still give you some sort of benefit. So I'm glad that they're actually dropping from sort of high-end or sort of endgame stuff, whereas they weren't before. You'd actually have to go back and play with a new character and pick those things up and basically keep them. Moving on, it says, we are looking at ways to provide lower value quality mods in in-game world tiers in the future to provide a solution to the fact that on very low skill power builds, there will be room for those mods. And currently, we are aware that means you have to save mods from your level in experience. So that just goes back to exactly what I was saying before, where you had to basically create a new character to actually save those mods to use them at the end game. So this is kind of a way that won't have to happen, basically. Faction key loot drops from bounties are now guaranteed and are displayed in the loot preview. A brilliant change. I'm not even sure if before they were on a chance base or they just weren't dropping for whatever reason, but I'm really glad there's actually a reliable source to get these faction keys, because as of right now, you just basically have to go into the underground and find the little things on the wall and remove the keys. But this is going to be a good way to actually get those keys, and also you'll be doing a bounty, which is always good because you get a lot of gear doing that. Increase material cap for standard and specialized crafting materials to 400 with all perks. Increase material cap for high-end crafting materials to 50. I actually think that was 20 before, so that's quite a significant change. And increase the material, any cap on stuff like materials, stash base, all of that sort of stuff is always a good thing. Increase the power for the wandering vendor so her inventory has a narrower gear score range closer to the top of the world tier gear score range. Another great change, because before, at least before this update, I felt as though you would go to her and she'd have gear from really low to semi-high, but never really high enough. As of right now, I believe she's actually dropping gear towards the 490 range in gear score, so definitely recommend going and finding out where she's at and getting that stuff. Certainly if you're trying to get up to gear score 500. Decreased damage to all NPC automatic shotguns. Brilliant change. Decreased damage of all NPC SMGs. Again, another awesome change. We then got Hey Agent. Staff in the base of operation will now shout at the player less frequently before. Again, another brilliant change. That was something I saw a lot on Reddit and forums, that sort of stuff, where they'd go into the base of operations. You've all experienced it. Every 2 seconds, someone's shouting at you, Hey Agent, and it gets very annoying. So you can definitely see how that's been reduced as well if you go into game. We then got new ambusher NPCs now roam the streets of DC. I've not actually come across these yet, but they sound cool. So if I get some footage of that sort of stuff, I'll certainly share it. So yeah, really looking forward to that. And PC only, they've added a field of view slider. Again, another great change. It's not actually coming to console, which is a real shame. And there are a lot more changes, guys, but most of it's like bug fixes and all that sort of stuff. But if you do, as I said, if you do want to go check it all out, then you can do. Amongst those changes are to the weapon mods and skill mods with graphs and the like, which you can again go check out in the full patch notes below. Moving on, and let's talk about the Exotic Pestilence LMG and how to get it. Now, this is not 100% being confirmed to be the best way, but the only way I've seen people get this LMG are by defeating outcast named bosses in the Dark Zone. It doesn't have to be the Occupied, it's any Dark Zone. Now, reports state it's also dropping from True Sun named bosses as well, but that may well be a bug, considering the weapon description talks about the outcast and the skin is certainly outcast orientated with its graffiti and that sort of thing. Now, let's take a look at this weapon and see if it's actually worth getting. The talents are Plague of the Outcasts. After hitting the same enemy 20 times, that enemy is inflicted with the Plague of the Outcasts. Whenever an enemy with the Plague of the Outcasts is killed, they leave a toxic cloud for 10 seconds that deals 200% weapon damage per second to anyone inside and inflicts them with Pestilence. The second talent is called Pestilence. This debuff reduces healing received by 50% for 10 seconds. Whenever an enemy with Pestilence would be downed, they are instead instantly killed. The debuff is removed if the enemy is repaired to full armor. And in the holstered talent called Outcast Resilience, while holstered, gain 20% bonus armor for 5 seconds whenever you are affected by blind, bleed, or burning. So this certainly sounds interesting. I don't think we've got any weapons like this in the Division 1 or ever before. Now, this weapon hasn't dropped for me yet, but Redditor Nokami 93 posted the images I'm using here, so all credit to them. Now, the main stats they showed were as follows. 50% damage to targets out of cover, damage is 4k, RPM is 550, and mag is 100. Now, you'll probably think of the same as me. Why is the base damage so very low? Well, I think it's because you are meant to rely on the talents for the damage, but it doesn't actually quite work, and actually it makes the Pestilence one of the worst LMGs in the game, which is a real shame because it's got a very interesting way of dealing damage. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it says that once an NPC or player is inflicted with Plague of Outcast and is killed, a toxic cloud is left behind for 10 seconds. That deals 200% weapon damage per second. 200% weapon damage. Now, that sounds like a lot, but when your base damage is only 4k, it means you'll only be doing 8k, which is still way too low when you consider that other weapons in the same category, like the M60 for example, which is probably the top tier LMG, they all have a base damage that exceeds 20k per bullet effectively. Now the base damage is, for me, on this weapon, far too low. And secondly, the toxic cloud it leaves is pretty useless. Now NPCs will just sort of flat out avoid the cloud like they do with fire, grenades, all that good stuff. And if you're brave enough or even skilled enough to actually hit 20 bullets on a player without dying straight away and get this cloud to proc in PvP, players will simply just run out of the cloud, and at that point it becomes useless. Now if the cloud actually slowed movement by say 75%, so you're almost trapped, you could still move but very, very slowly, and the base damage was increased to say 15k and it reduced your overhaul healing by 50% for 10 seconds, then I'd probably consider this a very strong weapon and worthy of its exotic nature. But until then, it's not worth it, guys, but certainly it's one for the collection. Next we have the Nemesis Exotic Sniper Rifle. So you can actually get 2 parts of this sniper right now, but the remaining 2 we believe are time gated, which I will explain. Now the first part can be found in the Tidal Basin Stronghold mission. It's worth noting that you must have completed the Stronghold for the first time as part of the story campaign, so this would be your second time going through the mission. Now whilst playing through, you will see this tower. If you go to the second floor, you will find this keycard, and of course you just want to pick that one up. Now once you go through the mission, as normal, you'll enter the hovercraft. You'll probably remember this from the campaign. You clear the room, and at the back, you are directed right, but don't go there. What you want to do is turn left, and there'll be a door. It'll ask you if you want to open it, and you'll be basically using the keycard to open it. In there will be a weapon box, and it will have this weapon, which is the Attribution SR1 marksman rifle. Now, I already have it, which is why it didn't actually open for me, but I grabbed this screenshot so you guys could see it. And then all you want to do is dismantle this weapon to get the marksman rifle scope, the tally. I don't like the fact that I had to actually dismantle this, but for the sake of getting the exotic piece, you have to. Now, for the second part, you will need to complete this week's invaded mission, which is Capitol Hill. At the end of the mission, you will encounter a boss called David Prime Maxwell. They will drop the marksman rifle barrel, the Scourge. The last 2 pieces will drop from the invaded District Union Stronghold and Roosevelt Island. So you'll have to wait for these on the sort of weekly rotation, so it may be 2 weeks, it may be more, depending on what's next and what comes afterwards. Lastly, the 8th Ivory Key is now available and working. I say available and working because before, it got to a point where you would do all the stuff and then nothing would happen, and the devs did confirm it was bugged. So once you have activated the computer under the Washington Monument control point, following the saluting of the 3 graves, you will need to track back to the top at night time and stand in the orange circle. Once you stand in the orange circle, this will summon the hunter in front of you, and boom, that's your 8th Ivory Key. So there you go, guys. That was the main stuff to have dropped since the Tidal Basin update yesterday. There are other little bits and bobs, but as of right now, not enough for me to really make a video about. But of course, just stay tuned because I will have a lot more of these news videos. Now, I want you to let me know what you thought of the Tidal Basin Stronghold down in the comments below, i.e. the story and the actual Stronghold itself. I may actually cover this in a future video and give you my opinion on the end of the story in many ways, and the actual Stronghold itself, i.e. layout and all that sort of stuff. But I'm not quite sure yet. I want you guys to let me know what you thought. With that said, if there are any sort of secrets or spoilers or anything you want to share with me, please either DM me on Twitter or you can drop me an email. Both of those links will be down below. With that said though, thanks very much for your support, and until the next one, epic out.